Okay, so in case you're in the wrong room, we're going to be talking about QBasic. If you don't know what QBasic is, you're probably in the wrong room. But I will help to explore what that is in a moment. Who am I? I'm just a hobbyist. I really love the programming language BASIC, past, present, and hopefully future. BASIC in all its forms, even the worst of the basics. I can find some redeeming quality with it. For example, anybody have any idea what you would consider the worst version of BASIC there is?
Tiny BASIC.
I can name worse. Anybody else? So how about the Atari 2600 cartridge? So can anybody, if anybody's ever played with that, you can probably agree that it's probably the worst implementation of BASIC you've probably ever found. However, I want to say, like I said, find a redeeming quality. I also think it's the most amazing feat of engineering that exists. There's no memory on the 2600 to speak of. And in addition to that, that version of BASIC, when you actually when you're running it, it actually gives you full visual debugging experience, line by line. It traces through it on a device that has no power. So it's pretty impressive. It's still a pretty crappy version of BASIC, but yeah, there is a limit. Yeah, and you can only draw, like, I think you can do 2 missiles and 2 player characters, or one missile and 2 player, and the characters, the sprites are just dots. So, so I'm just a hobbyist. I enjoy doing this. I'm a software developer by trade, so to speak, and in order for me not to lose my mind in my day-to-day work, I enjoy doing stuff like this and the code you're about to see. So, and I want to make sure that you, kind of a spoiler, it's not far along yet, but you'll see something, and I promise you it'll have bugs in it, because it's a work in progress and a lot of experimentation. So in any case, just to kind of give a little bit of backstory, if you were here in my previous presentation yesterday, some of these slides look a little familiar, but why am I interested in BASIC? Well, clearly enough people are interested in BASIC that it has its own roadside historical marker. Not aware of another programming language that has that. So here's Bill Gates. So I'm showing this slide for a reason. People think that Bill Gates came up with the BASIC interpreter in 1975-ish. The spark of that occurred when he was 13 years old. And there's more details about that were just came out within the last few weeks, because he came out with a book. And and apparently he wrote a BASIC interpreter for the PDP-8. That machine was taken away. That code was lost forever, but apparently he's such a interesting individual that the code for his interpreter was actually still in his mind and ready to go when he needed it a few years later. So this is basically not when he came up with the BASIC interpreter. This is him being influenced by Kimony and Kurtz to, be like me and love the programming language BASIC. So here's a picture of him in his last year of high school. Fun fact, he actually reproduced, I don't have a copy of it up in here, but if you look on the internet for this photo, you can find he actually recreated this photo many years later in exacting detail. So 1975, this is just a quick recap. Microsoft BASIC started here. At some point, that was an interpreter. At some point, people said, we want a compiler. So they eventually came out with a compiler. I think this one was on the CPM machines. They also got into business BASIC, and I'm kind of pointing this out because at some point Microsoft decided to focus more on business and less on us kind of people. But so this is kind of the spark of where that was. And again, another BASIC compiler. This is the very precursor to them coming out with QBasic. Now again, we're talking about QBasic, so how do we get from QBasic to QBasic? There's a couple of releases. Interestingly enough, the first version, that's what it looked like. It was only a compiler. Second version, that's what it looks like. Anybody used any of the Turbo products? This looks very familiar, doesn't it? So apparently they figured that out, and by version 4, they hadn't changed it quite yet, but this is where they changed it. It has kind of the same color coding as it did before, but a new layout as far as menus and such go. And then, of course, Microsoft QuickBasic finally comes along, 4.5 comes along. And it kind of continued on for a little bit in the form of Microsoft Professional Development System. And there was actually a special version called QBX. If you weren't doing really complex stuff you're not really too concerned with. However, where we start to veer the path is in this book and floppy disk combination. That is a product that was made available, and you'll notice it's called I don't know if you can see it on there, but it contains the QuickBasic interpreter. So it's still not QBasic, but it's kind of the precursor. And then, of course, MS-DOS 5 comes out. QBasic is released with it. GWBasic, as you pointed out, was killed off at that point. And they continued moving forward with QBasic being available in the operating system until Windows XP, even if you didn't know that. So I'm calling it third time's a charm. Technically it's 4 or 15, depending on how you want to count. FreeBasic is the first project out there that kind of stepped up and said, oh, we want to create a replacement to QuickBasic. They were very specific in that. But the difference between QBasic and QuickBasic is pretty minor in that QBasic does not have a compiler and they crippled the interpreter. But it is the same interpreter that's in QuickBasic. So it's basically the same menu items, same structure. They just removed some stuff and said, hey, here it is. Another fun fact, if you were not aware of this, in MS-DOS 5, this was changed in 6, but in MS-DOS 5, the edit program was QBasic. So it was just a stub that passed a command line to QBasic to give you the edit.exe experience. So in MS-DOS 6, they finally did the true split, and it was a separate executable. So FreeBasic is just a compiler only. There's no UI for it. You can get one of several that other members in the community are putting together, but none of them actually look or feel like QBasic. And FreeBasic has grown over the years to kind of start distancing itself from QBasic in general, because now it's FreeBasic. They have their own identity, their own experience, their own way of doing things, so much so that, I don't know if one of these slides says it. Here we go, yeah. So to use it, by default, FreeBasic is not in QBasic mode or QuickBasic mode. And even when it is in QuickBasic mode, like GWBasic, QBasic had sight and sound. FreeBasic has no sound, as well as the event stuff doesn't work. And there's more. The list for what it doesn't do in comparison is actually quite long, and I don't want to spend a ton of time on that. I just wanted to point out a couple of things that clearly identify FreeBasic as not being the replacement. So then we go to the more controversial one, and in here we have QB64, and the developer behind that, Rob, I think like in New Zealand or Australia or something, I think he had a really good idea. He started off on a really good path. He was not a professional developer, and it did not appear to have experience with dealing with the open source community. And I think that eventually led to him abandoning the project and basically throwing it over the fence and said, y'all do whatever you want. And since then, there's all kinds of conversation around what QB64 is or is not. However, a few items on this list are the way that they implement modules in the include statement are completely different, foreign in fact. it is a compiler only. There is no interpreter, so there's no instant feedback, the immediate window doesn't exist or anything else. The idea of just opening up QBasic, writing some code for some tinkering, just quick and dirty stuff, right? And then closing it out and it be completely cleaned up is really foreign to QB64 because it is a compiler. It has to create files. Those files have to then go through the process, okay? Like I said, no immediate window, and there's a weird split personality occurring within the IDE itself. It's like it's going out of its way to kind of look like QBasic and QuickBasic, but at the same time, they're trying to make it modern and everything else, and the keys and the hotkeys you would use, the editing experience, how it works, how it flows. It looks like it on the surface, but then there's just so many things about it that aren't the same. And one could argue that, oh, they just evolved it. We can grant them that, but that doesn't address these other issues that are on this list. So talking with a lot of people on various groups in different Pocket communities, they all kind of come back with kind of reflecting some of the things that I feel are wrong with the project. Now let me be clear, FreeBasic, I'm a huge fan of. If you are looking for a modern version of BASIC that can do pretty impressive things at no cost, that is open source and has a very active developer community behind it, it's a great version of a compiler and a modern BASIC implementation. QB64, if it does what you want it to do, that's great. If it doesn't, well, if you want to jump in and be one of the people contributing to the project, then by all means, it needs that. It needs those people. But at the same time, it also has other issues structurally as a community that has might cause you to want to look elsewhere. I'll just leave it at that and move on. So what is community QBasic? So first and foremost, it does have the word community in it. So what do I mean by that? Well, it is going to be an open source project. And the idea is that I'm hoping that at some point contributions will be coming in. However, it does have to fit within the scope of at least what version 1 is going to be, and I've already kind of mapped out what maybe the next and the next and the next. But honestly, those things that come next are irrelevant if it can't accomplish the first set of goals, okay? And just for some fun, you can see the copyright notice on there.
What's the story behind that?
The story behind Dartmouth didn't?
Yes.
So they didn't copyright it. They didn't trademark it. That's how we end up with so many different variants of BASIC floating around in the world. Even more than Fortran. So this all started with this idea of me asking and polling different people in different communities. And so then I asked the question, well, what if there were a true replacement? And I guess you can put quotes around true replacement because I guess that's in the eye of the beholder, right? It's kind of subjective, yeah. There are things that we might be able to look at that's slightly objective, but at the same time, there's just this feel. If you know it, you know it. And arguing against people who don't know it is honestly just a waste of time. So, so what are the rules that I'm setting forth? The overall editing experience needs to be pretty much identical in every way possible. The idea is any book ever published on the subject of QBasic, you should be able to pick it up and use it on this project. You shouldn't have to try to adapt it or adjust it. If it says to use this menu item, press this hotkey, well, that should just work. If there is a change, hopefully it's an additive thing, not a modification just for the sake of modification. And again, kind of going on with that, this is kind of two things that say the same thing, right? It kind of falls in that under that one umbrella. there are going to be circumstances where there are technical reasons why something cannot be done, and okay, still going to strive to come up with answers for that. But for example, modern machines, Linux, Windows, Mac, they're not going to let you poke into random memory addresses on the machine. So that's a bit of a problem. So there are going to be some features that just can't work, and obviously machine code embedded within your basic program are also not going to work, which kind of leads to that whole peek and poke problem. But things are in place to say, no, don't change things for the sake of change. I'll give you an example on that. In order to support modern approach to copy and paste, first and foremost, the project is going to support the way that it was. Control-C, Control-V, and Control-X are not the way that they did it. So if your muscle memory is such that that is what you're used to, the only way to move forward with giving you the ability to use Control-C, Control-X, and Control-V in this modern version is that I have to add support for you to be able to remap the hotkeys. I can't even say, oh, just give you both, because, well, now the hotkeys, what that used to do, is no longer available. So that's what I'm getting at when, if a choice is going to be made to support something modern, it has to be additive, but whatever you get out of the box has to be what works in those books. And then the last one is it needs to be fast, because it's QBasic, right? And one of the reasons behind this idea in general is that there's a project out there, just looking at the time, there's a project out there that it's an emulator project. I would argue the most interesting emulator project to ever exist. It's called MICE. Anybody heard of that? So it stands for Most Ill-Conceived Emulator. And it has a full scopes, full rules applied to it. You're not allowed to use anything that's machine language specific, any tricks, any hacks, or anything else. It must be written in GW, and it must be able to work in GWBasic and QBasic using just what's built into the tooling. So you're limited to GWBasic for the emulator, but no tricks, no hacks, no peeks and pokes, no machine code. To prove that it can be done and done well, he actually created a TRS-80 Model 1 emulator in GWBasic. So I tell that because I want to, number one, see if, that's kind of one of my final goal tests is, can this interpreter run that beyond the capabilities of, say, GWBasic or QBasic on raw hardware, on modern devices.
Have you heard of this guy called Bisquick from Finland?
Yes.
He created like a Doom rendering engine.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. So obviously we also desire to be cross-platform. So I will say that for me, that means Windows and Linux, because I don't own a Mac. So I'm going to have to rely on other contributors to help. I know. Yeah. And the other thing is where does this fit, right? Is this just a project for vanity? Is it, or could there be a real purpose and use for this, right? And if it does, where exactly does that fit? I would argue that Visual Basic is a pretty phenomenal modern version of Basic, and it's still ongoing. People say it's dead, but it's still active. It's just not, adding the new keyword of the day or, whatever new fancy way of developing adding it of the day is being added to it. So, but it is being maintained, it is being improved, and it is growing. But I will just say flat out, asking someone to sit down and jump into Visual Basic with no previous knowledge is beyond a daunting task. And it's going to be, unless you are really motivated, it will fail. There's too much boilerplate. There's the .NET framework itself is just too big. And where do you even start? So my thinking here is that this can fit in a space where, okay, fine, if you're interested in just tinkering and kind of exploring, well, QBasic was a really good way of doing that. The question is, can it be a good way of doing that going forward? There are alternatives. This is just going to be an option. So, and then in version 2 and beyond, the idea that I'm going to put in there is that whatever you build in this have full fidelity transition to whatever the latest version of Visual Basic is. So that way your code does not, if you hit that glass ceiling, well, you can move that glass ceiling out of the way, and now you have to be in this, yes, more complex environment, but now you can continue marching forward. There is a website, QBasic.com, and that's kind of the end of the slides, so I'm going to then jump over into, why don't I show you what it might look like. So here it is, obviously running inside a window, and I want to point out something. So I could, of course, install something like DOSBox. Let's see how that's going to look on the, there we go, okay, good. And of course, I can type in QBasic, right? And I can have the real version running on a modern platform. Where are the problems inside of this? One is you can do frame skipping and other stuff to kind of speed up, and you can kind of tweak DOSBox to run faster, but you're not really running at the full speed of what the machine will let you run at. That's number one. Number two, whenever you use DOSBox and you like click inside of it with a mouse, it's hard to get back outside of it. And then number three is DOSBox has access to your file system if you give it access to it, but you're creating a window into your file system, not your entire file system. So there's just a bunch of problems with having it locked into DOSBox. Of course, the benefit is you have the real thing, and it's not a clone, and so on and so forth. But the other thing I don't really care for is that depending on which rendering you do, it's kind of hard to actually have a sharp version of the font in the screen. Not a huge issue, but it is there, versus here is Community QBasic. And so obviously you can see it come up, and I can escape out of the welcome screen. I can go file, open, and all that good stuff. I can, of course, type in 10. I can put 9 numbers in it if I want to, but I can do 4x equals 1 to 10. Print. There's no IntelliSense, by the way. Hello world, and then next, and just because I know there's a little bit of an issue here, I'm going to go ahead and put a CLS in front of it. And when I press it, I get an instant output. And this is one of the other problems with something like QB64. Its output is another window. So you're constantly bouncing back and forth between the output window because the output window is actually a separate program. And once you launch it, it's no longer connected to that. So if you don't close that and try to launch it again, you're now going to have a second copy of your executable, if that's even possible, depending on which OS you're on. But assuming that you're on Windows, you can't compile because it can't replace the executable that's currently running. So, of course, I can press escape and I can run it again, and this is the bug I was talking about. I'm in the process of trying to get this idea of, just so you can actually see what it really is supposed to look like, and then I can show you the other stuff. And then I can answer some questions. So, I'm going to show it in here to show you what it's supposed to be. So if I type in here print 10 plus 10, right, and press F5. Thought I pressed F5. Oh, how about F5? So I got 20. Now there's a couple of things I want to point out here. First thing you'll see is that my original DOS output is still there. Okay? It didn't clear it. I didn't tell it to clear the screen, so it's just outputting to, it's adding to wherever that cursor was and continuing forward, right? So when I do this, I can also do Alt-View output screen if I wanted to, right? And then I decided, oh, I didn't mean plus, I want to multiply, right? And then press F5. My previous result is there with my new result below it. Now, this is not how you would write, like, most likely how you would write most programs, but when you're tinkering and you're just playing, you just want something to happen, and you might actually do want to compare it to what you did before you made the change to see what the change was and how that compares to what it was previously. So that experience is lost in these more modern attempts that have already come before. So let me get out of this. No, I don't want to save it. And just to kind of give you an idea, you know, the demo gods are always going to be unfavorable to those that are doing demos. I'm in the process of adding that functionality now, and that's why you're seeing some redraw issues, because it's actually kind of challenging to deal with it. So, because it's the same window that's in there for the IDE as it is for the output, and so in any case. But you can see that, you know, like I said, it has the open dialogue. You can go into different dialogues, and they are functional. So the editor is in there. The hotkeys are indeed working. So, you know, I can come in here. I don't know if I can do it on my laptop. I can't. So, but if I highlight this line here, I can get rid. I need to delete. So enter. Highlight the line. Delete. It's gone. Press enter. You know. And then run it again. And like I said, ignore the fact that the output is not quite right, because I'm still in the middle of working on that. This is, the source code to this is not available yet, primarily because, well, it's not ready. So
there's no versions released yet?
There are no versions of this released yet.
This is a, what do you call it? Sneak peek.
Sneak peek, yes. It is definitely pre-alpha, yes. So okay, so now we can just kind of go into some questions, right? Because I'm so glad you asked. I am totally twisted, and the best language to write a QBasic interpreter in is, of course, Visual Basic. And in order to accomplish this, so this project actually had several different things that kind of all came together that go, oh wait, maybe I can do that. So, so I have another project. Let me go ahead and close that for a second. Do I have a? Yeah, here we go. So here's this project here, which is called VB Pixel Game Engine, and it does two things. One, it gives you raw pixel drawing access to a Windows output of some type, right? Now this is going to not run at full speed because I'm running it in resolution that's kind of funky. But for most things, I mean, I'm still getting, you know, 35 plus frames per second, and there are several layers. If you know anything about the Amiga, yeah, yes. So it is using the assets from there and kind of reproducing that look and feel. Can it be optimized more? I'm working on it. But VB Pixel Game Engine is for a Visual Basic developer. You can use this to create games, 2D games, for Mac. Sorry, not in theory Mac if somebody comes along to help me out, but for Windows and Linux. So, and what happened is I said, well, somebody kind of said something to me, and I said, my response to it was, well, yeah, I can create that UI in this. So none of this is actual text. This is all pixels. So everything that's being drawn, everything that you see, 100% is per pixel. And so the font is described in there, and it just kind of grew out of there. And I'm like, well, wait, I've already built an interpreter before. Not so happy with QB64. I can make the UI that runs on Linux and Windows. Why not? And it kind of grew from there. So it is in Visual Basic, but it's also taking advantage of Pixel Game Engine, which is another one of my open source projects. And that code is available. So what's driving this? So part of this is already open source. MIT specifically, so take it and do what you want with it. And this will be MIT open source as well. So basically MIT means please don't sue me, and I'm not going to stop you doing whatever you want to do. You can literally do whatever you want.
It's almost one step more permissive than BSD, which is
Correct.
pretty much.
Yeah, just I use MIT on everything I do because I just don't care. If I'm sharing the code, have at it. I would hope that you'd give me credit, but I'm not going to chase you down and tell you, you must give me credit. Huh?
So the next keyboard will be using this.
Could be. So one of the things that I do have in here that I'll kind of give you a sneak peek of is, again, these are just experiments. I was just thinking out loud, wondering. Look at that menu item. So this is just a text editor for all intents and purposes, right? So why can't I use it to write TRS-80 basic code?
You can have multiple versions.
Which then kind of gives this future-looking thing about, well, wait, so I could launch the emulator for it, right? But what if I could? Well, wait, what if the Q in QBasic stood for more than just quick? What if it was like this generic placeholder for, well, it's like a continuum. See, y'all got it, right?
When are you going to add support for Rocky Mountain Basic?
I can answer that question. I will not. However, I hopefully will be putting together a framework that other people can come along and contribute to support whatever platform and version of BASIC they want to help add in.
Atari 2600.
Yes.
There's an Atari.
So I will tell you that so I'm actually planning, so funny enough, Atari 2600 is one of the ones I'm planning on doing.
So the only keys that work are the arrow keys in the IDE?
So no, I'll give you the ability to type it in.
You're referring to the cartridge.
The cartridge, that's correct. No. Yeah, I am familiar with that one. But it's specifically the Atari 2600 giving you the ability to write in that dialect and run it in a pseudo environment. And if there was some way you could transfer that to an Atari 2600 with the cartridge, which you can't, in theory it should be able to work if it accepted a text mode transfer, which it does not. But for the fun of it, let's add it.
I spent $100 on eBay on that. I bought the cartridge and I.
And the little keyboard controllers, yes.
No, it didn't come with the overlays because there's those little plastic.
Right. Yep.
So I'm sensing a homebrew cartridge coming along. I'm thinking of ESP32.
So to kind of give you an idea of, have y'all heard of the phrase compiler as a service? There's only one company out there that does that. So it's Roslyn is the compiler behind Visual C# and Visual Basic. And they came up with this architecture called compiler as a service, not to be confused with, it must be attached to the internet. So this project is heavily inspired by Roslyn, and since I'm planning on not being the person that writes the compiler, it's not that I can't. I'll explain that in a second. I'll come back to that. I specifically want this to be an interpreter, so let's call this interpreter as a service. And the reason why I want it to be an interpreter is to encourage the sharing of code. Let's dominate GitHub with QBasic source files. let's let that number creep up. So to talk about the compiler part, everything that's needed to make this into a compiler is already there. Because some of the background to what I'm doing here is what actually is a joke project, but I wanted to make the joke real. Since 2001, when Visual Basic came out, there was a whole community that was referring to it as Visual Fred, and there was an ongoing VB6 community. There was an ongoing complaint that they shouldn't have even called it Visual Basic, maybe call it Visual B# or something. So I actually created a project, another open source project available now, to create a line number basic compiler for .NET. So it does compile. I mean, you can't do much with it yet. I just proof of concept. It got to the point where yes, you can create a compiled executable.
I had the hardest, my first computer was Amiga 500, right? Amiga Basic, written by Microsoft. So like 8 years later, I went to, I bought a Visual Basic for Dummies book. So let's make the transition. And then, like you said,
Yeah.
I really had a hard time.
It's a pretty big leap.
Like I was like,
Yeah.
what is this? I don't follow
Right.
that, you know?
Yeah. So that's kind of the way that the transition is going to be able to work is it'll convert what it needs to convert in order for it to work in Visual Basic, and it'll try to keep your code as close as possible as it can. And one way that it can do that is, and again, like I said, there's a whole lot of roads leading to this. I created another open source project that is a QBasic library, quote, runtime, for VB. And so that way you can take QuickBasic and do a quick conversion and have it as a Visual Basic program, and it would recreate, you know, all the video modes and how the serial port works. Now you had to modify some of the syntax to fit the fact that it's in Visual Basic, but the code would look nearly identical. Nibbles has been converted. Gorillas has been converted. So there is a Visual Basic .NET version of Gorillas. And if you look at the code, there's a lot of it that's like remarked out because it's irrelevant. And then the other code continues, and it's got very minimal. If you go to my GitHub repo, you can find it by going to QBasic.com. If you go there, dig around, you'll find the QBasic.NET libraries, and there's a couple of samples in there where I converted the QBasic code over to it, and it looks close. It obviously has to have the extra boilerplate and everything else, but go to that point. The leap is actually a pretty significant one because, well, the way you draw to the screen isn't the same. This gives you that same ability to do that.
And this is, I'm ignorant about this, Visual Basic, is it object-oriented?
And it is, yes. However, it has a lot of legacy to it. So, how many people in here are familiar with the Basic Computer Games books? Okay, so the first one in that I think is Amazing. And in my GitHub repo, you can find that one and another one. Yeah, where I literally convert the code from, you know, a GW Basic style. It's actually Microsoft Basic from way before, but I convert it from that style to a VB, and there's no object orientedness to it. There's no function calls to it. It's straight up. Other than having the boilerplate and changing, it doesn't have line numbers because VB doesn't support line numbers, but it does have labels, and those labels look very similar to those line numbers. In some cases, I actually renamed them where it makes sense that this is what that code is doing, and it's just, you know, a section of code that looks almost identical to what is in the Basic Computer Games books, except with the extra stuff added onto it to make it a console program. So, yes?
You don't need DOSBox for that, right?
You do not need DOSBox for this, and this is going to be just straight up have it available on Linux and Windows as a native application.
And you stand and start.
Yep.
Good. Another question. How COM ports. Will it manage the COM ports properly or no?
So that's a good question. So I'm going to have to add support for COM ports the way they were in QBasic, but I'm going to fix the bugs. In addition to that, I'm a huge fan of a company called Crescent Software. They were a professional development library package producer. And someone in the general community actually purchased all their assets and made it all freeware. Now, most of it's written in assembler, but all that documentation is available, and all the IP and ideas behind it is now freely available for us to implement however we want. So one of the options that's going to be in here again, it's got to do what was in the QBasic books to begin with. And these libraries were never available for QBasic, but I'm going to add in the extensions for those extensions into QBasic, and one of those is actually called PDQ-COM, which gives you much more granular control over serial port communications. Yes?
So obviously you've gone to great trouble to create the look and feel of the original experience with the integrated editor and the interpreter all as one thing. Could it or would it be on the roadmap in the future to be able to use a modern editor like VS Code and just use this as the...
That's another good question. So obviously the original version that doesn't work in Windows, you could pass on to it a command line and pass in the .bas file, and would automatically launch the program, right? And technically, if I approached it the same way, that would work inside of Visual Studio Code. But the plan is, and actually, I'm sort of involved. I was actually the spark of the idea. Somebody else did all the work. Let me be clear on that. I was just the guy with a brain fart that said, "Hey, we should do this." So the extension that's in Visual Studio Code for QB64, it's a pretty good one, but we hit the limitations. And part of the limitations of that is that QB64 doesn't have the necessary infrastructure and pieces in place to have that language server that's necessary for Visual Studio Code to really do what it needs to do. Because I'm building this as a, like I said, interpreter as a service. The plumbing for that will be there, and that's exactly the plan. I'm not going to make a bunch of additions and improvements to this, because this IDE is what it's supposed to be. However, you can use Visual Studio Code and this together with that language integration and get every benefit that you would want to get out of Visual Studio Code. And a huge fan of that model, so that's absolutely on my radar. Any other questions? Yes?
Could you talk a little bit about the Linux implementation? Are you doing that as well?
I am doing the Linux. So thanks to Windows 10, technically, they forced the requirement to go to 11 to make it really work. But no, I'm not upset about that at all. So Windows subsystem for Linux has really good integration in Visual Studio. And so from day one, VB Pixel Game Engine, I test it in both Linux and Windows from the same development environment, so I don't actually have to move it anywhere else. And same thing is happening inside of this. And specifically, I am making it work for Debian. Now, what is it going to require for anything else? I don't know the answer to that, and that's a future I just can't answer to just yet. Yes?
Any thoughts on converting VB for DOS up to more modern VB?
Are you asking because you have something in VB-DOS, or you would like to have a UI framework that's easy to do something with?
You know, back in the day when I actually took the time to consistently work with VB for DOS, it was pretty fun, but it's been a long time, and I have source code there that I would like maybe a modern framework, and I haven't seen any efforts to do that.
Is it possible to do it? I would say yes. Is it possible to do it in an interpreted environment? Absolutely. The machines we have now are blazingly fast. So, especially for something like this, right? So, I would say that's going to probably be in the have a discussion, and hopefully someone else will probably I'll accept pull request as long as it doesn't break what the core idea is. But I think it's a wonderful idea, and there needs to be something. This is actually one of my other core complaints about something like QB64. So for those that aren't aware, QB64, the IDE is written in QB64. However, it's designed in such a way that the entirety of that source code, other than potentially being able to pluck out, copy and paste, and potentially use it yourself, but then you go down the rabbit hole of other pieces are over here and other pieces over there. It's not very modular in its design. So you can't take advantage of the source code for QB64 to then write something of your own, leveraging those components, which aren't actually components. It's just that's a lost opportunity and something that I don't want to repeat. So I want to make sure that you can build. You should be able to build a clone of edit real easy. I mean, menus are menus, right? So why can't you have something that allows you to create menus? That's where that Crescent Quick Pack stuff starts to come into play. So not a direct answer, but open to the idea. Any other questions? Comments? You can tell me I'm insane.
We're all here.
So, I do have a website for it, QBasic.com. Right now, I don't know. I would say if you might be able to browse to it on your phone. I don't know that I want to connect to the internet up here. But if you do, there is actually one page on there is kind of a progress report, and it lists the keywords that are currently implemented. Where it basically is at the moment, no pun intended, I'm kind of starting off with Microsoft Basic 4K and trying to get that core done. And where it stands at the moment is the arrays have been the bane of my existence, trying to figure out how exactly I want to approach that. With GW Basic, it was easy because there weren't any functions. Well, this has functions. So I've been exploring how Visual Basic actually does it, and I'm leaning towards that, but I have to basically flip the logic of how they do it to how I'm going to do it, because this has default arrays. So it's good. And the interpreter, the way this interpreter works is it doesn't tokenize, but it turns everything into numbers, and then those numbers are what's actually interpreted. So it can run fast. I'm taking advantage of some tricks and techniques that I've learned over the years in Visual Basic of how to kind of leverage the compiler optimizations that are built in. So all that's being incorporated into this. And so I was going somewhere with this. Functions. So in here, you'll be able to declare your functions just like you did in the original, but it's basically irrelevant, because it'll know that those functions exist whether or not, because it's not going to interpret it line by line. It's going to basically pre-process and then execute fast. Any other questions? Yes?
I apologize if you've already covered this, but when you're all said and done tinkering, can you actually save out the file that's on your PC?
Oh yeah. It'll be a .bas file by default. I'm considering changing it to a different file extension as an option. So initially, out of the box, it will save as .bas. There will be the advice and maybe even a pop-up that suggests maybe you save it as a different file extension. Because I don't know if y'all noticed it or not, but a .bas file on any version of Windows is great evil. So if we give it a different file extension, then, it could literally be, instead of .bas, we could do .basic. There's no reason why it can't be more than 3 letters. So.
V as in Victor, AS.
It could be that, yeah. I've also thought of like QBS. There's a lot of different options that we can go with. And then, and one of the reasons maybe to do that is not just to work around the fact that Windows hates .bas files. It could also be that if you have saved it in that, with that file extension, it can automatically recognize that, oh, you are definitely using it in here, not necessarily cross-platform. By cross-platform, I mean historically. So you're not going to try to put it on a DOS machine and try to run it in actual QBasic. So whatever enhancements are in here, if it's a .bas, it might go, well, you know, it'll run in here, but good luck. And it may even bark at you and tell you that, well, you know, this isn't going to work in QBasic 1.1. Whereas if you got the different file extension, well, it's like, yeah, don't care. We know you're only going to be doing it here. So that may be another reason to do a different file extension. But the ability to save is already in there. It saves as ASCII. So, and when I say ASCII, yes, I do mean ASCII, not UTF-8 or because the intent is that you should be able to take that file as is and potentially put on inside a DOSBox and execute it inside a DOSBox.
Or you can change it with a word processor.
The thought has crossed my mind. So I will tell you, as a Windows user, there has been times, especially since I'm kind of going back and forth between stuff, there are times when I'm kind of like, Notepad is just too much, especially now it's got tabs and it remembers the tabs and they messed up the key mappings. Kind of like, maybe I just want edit.
I use Northern Commander.
I could go that route.
That still works.
Of course.
So what else you got? So out of curiosity, if this did actually exist and was available, who would be interested in actually playing with it? Okay, now I'm going to ask the hard question. Who would be interested in contributing to it? So that's kind of the gist of it. Like I said, it's got a little bit to show. It does actually execute some code. If you want to see what keywords are currently supported, you can go to the website and see that current list. Right now, it's pretty far along for doing like basic computer games, except the array support. So that's the next thing I got to add in there.
You'll like eventually put it on GitHub.
Yes. Yep.
I just don't know Visual Basic and come to myself with open.
You already, if you know QBasic, you know Visual Basic. Seriously, so just to put that, I actually stand by that statement. In the VB5, VB6, VB4, 3, 2, 1, they changed it in such a way that QBasic was kind of no longer, that knowledge wasn't extremely transferable. But in .NET, they brought back in console software development. And in console software development, a lot of that overhead of doing Windows and event-oriented and clicking a button and creating a display, all that's just gone. So if you get a chance, go to my repo and look up those basic computer games.
So does Visual Basic use that just-in-time compiler, I guess? Is it part of that?
So, actually, that's a really good question. So .NET as a platform, and .NET the open source version, not .NET the proprietary version that Microsoft calls Microsoft .NET Framework because they're so great in making things confusing. The newest version of .NET has the ability to, obviously it's just in time, it runs inside of the .NET environment and all that good stuff, right? Common language runtime, etc., right? However, it also has native code compiling capabilities. This is already being tested and verified and make sure that it indeed can be natively code compiled. So .NET not required. Yeah. So just because it's being built in .NET doesn't mean you have to have .NET to run it. Any other questions? So am I really an idiot with a microphone? So I guess we'll call it there. Yep. Thank y'all.